Maria wiped down the sticky tables at Romano's diner for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the rowdy group of college students who had been making her life miserable for the past 2 hours. "Hey, clumsy!" one of them shouted, snapping his fingers loudly. "We need more napkins over here, and try not to trip this time." The others burst into laughter, remembering how Maria had stumbled earlier when they deliberately stuck out a foot to trip her. She had said nothing then, just quietly cleaned up the spilled drinks and brought them new ones without charge. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she gathered a stack of napkins. At 28, she had been working at this run-down diner for 3 years, ever since she moved to the city. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, and the customers were often cruel, but she needed this job. Or at least that's what everyone believed. "Look at her shaking," sneered Jessica, the ringleader of the group. She was a pretty blonde who came from money and enjoyed using her privilege to make others feel small. "Are you scared of us, little mouse?" Maria approached their table slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She wore a simple white uniform that had seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything more than what she seemed, a struggling waitress trying to make ends meet. "Here are your napkins," Maria said softly, her voice barely audible above the diner's background noise. "We can't hear you," laughed Brad, Jessica's boyfriend. He was the type who peaked in high school and thought being loud made him important. "Speak up, or are you mute too?" The group erupted in laughter again. Other customers in the diner glanced over but quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. The night manager, Pete, was in the back office doing paperwork and either couldn't hear the commotion or chose to ignore it. Maria placed the napkins on their table and turned to leave, but Jessica wasn't finished with her entertainment. "Wait a minute," Jessica called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I want to ask you something. How does it feel to be such a failure? I mean, you're almost 30 and still serving burgers to people like us. Don't you have any dreams? Any ambitions?" Maria stopped walking but didn't turn around. Her shoulders tensed, and for just a moment, something dangerous flickered in her dark eyes. But she quickly suppressed it, remembering why she was here, why this charade was necessary. "I bet she doesn't even have a real home," chimed in Derek, another member of their group. "Probably lives in some tiny apartment with cockroaches. Or maybe she still lives with her parents," added Sarah, Jessica's best friend. "Can you imagine being that pathetic?" The cruelty continued for several more minutes. They made jokes about Maria's appearance, her job, her presumed poverty, and her obvious shyness. Each comment was designed to cut deeper than the last, and they seemed to feed off each other's meanness. Through it all, Maria remained silent. She continued her work, clearing tables, taking orders from other customers, and enduring the group's verbal abuse with an almost supernatural patience. What they didn't know was that this patience hadn't come naturally to her. It had been hard-earned through years of practice, years of learning to control impulses that could be deadly. As the evening wore on, the group's behavior escalated. They began throwing small pieces of food at Maria when she passed by their table. They called her degrading names and made crude comments about her body. When she bent over to clean a nearby table, Brad made a loud, inappropriate comment that made the other customers uncomfortable. "You know what I think?" Jessica said, her voice carrying across the nearly empty diner. "I think our little waitress here is probably desperate for attention. Maybe that's why she works in a place like this. She's probably never had a real man show interest in her." Maria's grip tightened on the cleaning cloth she was holding. She paused in her work, her breathing becoming slightly deeper. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the subtle change in her posture, the way she seemed to grow taller, more confident. But the group was too drunk on their own cruelty to notice. "Hey, Maria!" Jessica called out, having learned her name from the crooked name tag pinned to her uniform. "Come over here. We want to give you some advice about life." Reluctantly, Maria walked back to their table. She stood at a careful distance, her hands clasped in front of her. "Sit down," Jessica commanded, patting the seat next to her. "We're going to help you figure out how to improve yourself." "I prefer to stand," Maria replied quietly. "Oh, so she does have some preferences," Brad laughed. "I was starting to think you were some kind of robot." For the next 20 minutes, they subjected Maria to what they called life coaching, but was really just an extended session of psychological torture. They told her she needed to lose weight, change her hair, get better clothes, and find a real job. They suggested she was probably single because no man would want someone so pathetic. "You know what your problem is?" Jessica said, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. "You have no backbone. You let people walk all over you. That's why you'll never amount to anything." Maria's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," Jessica continued, emboldened by what she mistook for submission. "Look at you. You're shaking, you won't make eye contact, and you're letting a bunch of kids half your age tell you how worthless you are. It's actually kind of sad." What Jessica couldn't see was the calculation happening behind Maria's seemingly timid exterior. Maria was memorizing faces, voices, names. She was noting the expensive watch on Brad's wrist, the designer handbag Jessica carried, the way they casually mentioned their parents' occupations and their own privileged backgrounds. "Maybe we should help her practice being more assertive," suggested Derek. "Maria, tell us what you really think about us." The dare hung in the air like a challenge. The group leaned forward, expecting either continued submission or perhaps some mild pushback they could easily crush. Maria looked at each of them in turn, her dark eyes moving from face to face with a precision that might have worried them if they had been paying attention. When she finally spoke, her voice was still quiet, but there was something different about it now. "I think," Maria said slowly, "that you have no idea what you're dealing with." The group exchanged glances and burst into laughter. "Ooh, scary," Jessica mocked. "What are you going to do, spill coffee on us?" Maria allowed herself a small smile. "Something like that." As closing time approached, the group finally prepared to leave. They had spent hours tormenting Maria, and they were pleased with their night's entertainment. They left the insultingly small tip and made sure to create as much mess as possible before departing. "Thanks for the fun evening, Maria," Jessica called out as they headed for the door. "Maybe we'll come back tomorrow night for round 2. Maria watched them leave, noting the expensive car they climbed into and the license plate number. As the diner fell quiet, she began cleaning up their table, her movements now more fluid and confident than they had been all evening. Pete emerged from the back office, counting the night's receipts. "Those kids giving you trouble again?" "Nothing I can't handle," Maria replied. And for the first time that night, her voice carried a hint of something that might have made Pete uncomfortable if he had been listening more carefully. As Maria finished her closing duties, she pulled out an old flip phone from her apron pocket. It was a stark contrast to the smartphones everyone else carried, but it served her purposes perfectly. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "It's me," she said when someone answered. Her voice was completely different now, confident, authoritative, with an edge that could cut glass. "I need you to look into some people for me." She rattled off the names she had learned, the license plate number, and descriptions of Jessica and her friends. The person on the other end asked no questions, just confirmed they would have the information by morning. Maria hung up and finished closing the diner. As she walked to her own car, a modest sedan that gave no hint of her true circumstances, she thought about the evening's events. Part of her job required her to blend in, to appear harmless and forgettable. But Jessica and her friends had pushed too far, and now they had attracted the attention of someone they really shouldn't have messed with. The shy, trembling waitress was gone now, replaced by someone far more dangerous. Maria drove through the empty city streets, her mind already working through possibilities. By tomorrow, she would know everything about Jessica's group: where they lived, where they went to school, who their families were, and most importantly, what they valued most. As she pulled into the driveway of a house much nicer than anything a diner waitress could afford, Maria allowed herself to think about justice. Not the legal kind that had failed too many people she cared about. No, this would be the kind of justice that came from understanding that actions had consequences, and that sometimes those consequences came from the most unexpected places. Jessica had been right about one thing. Maria had been letting people walk all over her. But that was about to change, and when it did, the college students who thought cruelty was entertainment were going to learn that some people were much more than they appeared to be. The next morning, Maria sat in her spacious kitchen, sipping espresso from a delicate porcelain cup that cost more than most people made in a week. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a home that spoke of wealth and refined taste. The contrast between this environment and the shabby diner where she spent her evenings was stark and deliberate. A manila folder lay open on the marble countertop, filled with photographs and detailed information about Jessica and her friends. Her people worked fast, as they always did. Within 12 hours, she knew everything about the college students who had made her their entertainment. Jessica Martinez, 21, daughter of a prominent real estate developer, psychology major at the State University, president of her sorority, and recipient of multiple academic scholarships that her family didn't actually need but took anyway. She lived in an expensive off-campus apartment paid for by daddy's money and drove a BMW that cost more than many people's annual salaries. Brad Thompson, 22, son of a city councilman with political ambitions. Business major with mediocre grades kept afloat by generous donations from his family. He had a history of minor infractions that were always mysteriously dismissed and a pattern of treating service workers like personal servants. Derek Chen and Sarah Williams completed the group. Derek's parents owned a chain of restaurants, and he had plans to take over the business after graduation. Sarah came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations, and believed it made them inherently superior to everyone else. Maria studied their faces in the photographs, noting how different they looked when they weren't sneering at someone they considered beneath them. In these candid shots taken from their social media accounts, they appeared young and carefree, blissfully unaware that their actions had consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. Little mouse, hope you've learned your lesson about knowing your place." Maria smiled. Jessica had gotten her number from the diner's customer service line, probably thinking she was being clever by continuing the psychological torture beyond their initial encounter. What Jessica didn't realize was that this text would make everything that followed much easier to justify. That afternoon, Maria made several phone calls. The first was to her husband, Vincent Rossetti, who was currently in Chicago handling business for the family. Vincent's voice softened when he heard her speak, a tone reserved only for her. "How's the assignment going, Bella?" he asked, using the pet name he had called her since they were teenagers. "Almost finished," Maria replied, "but we have a small complication." She told him about the previous night's events, keeping her voice level and professional despite the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Vincent listened without interruption, a habit he had developed during their 15 years of marriage. "You want me to come back early?" Vincent offered when she finished. "No, this is something I can handle myself. Besides, it might be good practice." Vincent chuckled. "You've been undercover too long, Maria. Don't let them make you forget who you are." "I haven't forgotten. If anything, last night reminded me." Her second call was to Tommy Benedetto, Vincent's lieutenant who handled operations in the city while the boss was away. Tommy had been with the family for over 20 years and had known Maria since she was a teenager learning the business from her own father. "What do you need, Mrs. Rossetti?" Tommy asked, his voice carrying the respect that Maria's position commanded. "Information about some local businesses. I'm sending you a list." The list included Derek's family restaurant chain, Brad's father's political campaign donors, and the real estate firm where Jessica's father worked. Within hours, Tommy would have detailed financial information about all of them, including any debts, legal troubles, or business relationships that could be leveraged. As evening approached, Maria prepared for another shift at the diner. But tonight would be different. Tonight, she wouldn't be the helpless victim that Jessica and her friends expected. She dressed carefully in her uniform, but this time she paid attention to details that had been deliberately sloppy before. Her hair was styled neatly, her makeup was subtle but polished, and she carried herself with a confidence that transformed her entire appearance. When she arrived at Romano's diner, Pete did a double-take. "You look different tonight," he said, studying her face. "Do I?" Maria asked innocently. "Maybe I'm just having a good day." The dinner rush was busier than usual, which meant Maria was moving constantly between tables, taking orders and serving food. She kept one eye on the door, waiting for Jessica's group to arrive. They had developed a pattern over the past few weeks, showing up around 8 o'clock for what they considered their entertainment. At 8:15, the door chimed, and Jessica walked in with Brad, Derek, and Sarah. They were laughing about something, already in the mood for another evening of cruelty. But when they spotted Maria, their expressions changed slightly. Well, Jessica said as they settled into their usual table. "Look who cleaned herself up. Trying to impress someone, Maria?" Maria approached their table with steady steps, her notepad ready. "Good evening. What can I get for you tonight?" The change in her demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. Her voice was clearer, her posture straighter, and she made direct eye contact for the first time since they had known her. "Whoa," Brad said, leaning back in his chair. "Someone's feeling confident tonight. Did you take our advice and find some backbone?" "Something like that," Maria replied smoothly. "Are you ready to order, or do you need more time?" Jessica narrowed her eyes, sensing that something was different, but not quite able to identify what had changed. "Actually, we want to talk to you first. Sit down." "I'm working," Maria said. "But I can take your order whenever you're ready." The refusal to comply with Jessica's command sent a ripple of tension through the group. They were used to Maria's immediate submission, and this new assertiveness threw them off balance. "I said sit down," Jessica repeated, her voice harder now. Maria looked at her for a long moment, then pulled out the chair and sat. But instead of the hunched, defeated posture they expected, she sat straight and relaxed, like someone who was choosing to be there rather than being forced. "We've been talking about you," Sarah began, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "We think you might actually have potential if you keep working on yourself." "How generous of you," Maria said, her tone perfectly neutral. Derek laughed uncomfortably. "She's being sarcastic." "I think we created a monster." "No," Maria said, looking directly at him. "You didn't create anything. You just revealed something that was already there." The cryptic response made them uncomfortable, but they pressed on, determined to reassert their dominance. Over the next hour, they subjected Maria to the same treatment as the night before, but her responses were different now. She didn't flinch, didn't tremble, and didn't look away. "You know what I think happened?" Jessica said, her frustration growing. "I think you went home and practiced being tough in the mirror, but you're still the same pathetic waitress who lets people walk all over her." "Am I?" Maria asked. "Prove me wrong," Jessica challenged. "Tell us what you really think about us. No holding back." Maria considered the request for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. You want to know what I think? I think you're spoiled children who mistake cruelty for power. I think you've never faced real consequences for your actions, and that's made you reckless. I think you choose targets like me because you're too cowardly to pick on someone who might actually fight back. The table fell silent. This wasn't the response they had expected, and the confidence in Maria's voice was unsettling. But most of all, Maria continued, I think you have no idea who you're really dealing with. Brad tried to laugh it off. What? Are you going to sue us? Report us to your manager? What's the worst a waitress can do? Maria's smile widened. Would you like to find out? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, the group seemed genuinely uncertain. There was something in Maria's eyes now that hadn't been there before, something that made primitive warning bells go off in their heads. Jessica recovered first, her anger overriding her instincts. You're pathetic, she spat. This whole tough act doesn't fool anyone. You're still just a nobody who brings people their food. If that's what you think, Maria said, standing up from the table, then you haven't been paying attention. As she walked away, Maria could hear them talking in urgent whispers. Their evening wasn't going as planned, and the uncertainty was making them anxious. But they were too proud and too foolish to simply leave. For the rest of the evening, they continued their attempts to humiliate Maria, but their hearts weren't really in it anymore. She had shifted the dynamic somehow, turned herself from victim to something else entirely. They couldn't quite put their finger on what had changed, but they all felt it. When closing time arrived, the group gathered their things reluctantly. They had expected another easy evening of entertainment, but instead they felt unsettled and off balance. This isn't over, Jessica said as she passed Maria on the way to the door. No, Maria agreed, it's not. After they left, Maria finished her closing duties with mechanical efficiency. Her mind was already moving to the next phase, the part where Jessica and her friends would learn that actions had consequences, even when those consequences came from the most unexpected places. As she locked up the diner, Maria reflected on how the evening had gone. She had shown them just enough of her true self to plant seeds of doubt, to make them wonder who they were really dealing with. Tonight had been about psychological preparation. Tomorrow would be about education. She drove home through empty streets, already planning the lessons that Jessica and her friends were about to receive. They had chosen to make an enemy of someone they should have ignored, and now they were going to discover that some people were much more dangerous than they appeared. By the time she pulled into her driveway, Maria had made her decision. The shy, trembling waitress act had served its purpose, but it was time for Jessica and her friends to meet the real Maria Rossetti. They wanted to see what the worst a waitress could do. Tomorrow, they would find out what the wife of a mafia boss could accomplish when someone pushed her too far. Jessica Martinez woke up to her phone buzzing insistently at 6 in the morning. Through bleary eyes, she saw 17 missed calls from her father and twice as many text messages, each one more frantic than the last. The first one made her blood run cold. "Call me immediately, we have a problem." She dialed his number with shaking fingers. "Jessica, thank God." Her father's voice came through strained and panicked. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "Dad, what's wrong? I'm in my apartment." "Stay there. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in." He paused, and she could hear papers shuffling in the background. "The Yamamoto deal fell through. All of it. $20 million worth of contracts, gone overnight. They won't return my calls, won't explain why. Something's happening, and I don't understand what." Meanwhile, across town, Brad Thompson was having his own crisis. His father, Councilman Richard Thompson, had been served with a federal investigation notice at dawn. Years of carefully buried campaign finance violations had suddenly surfaced, complete with documented evidence that would end his political career and likely result in criminal charges. Derek Chen's family restaurant chain was facing surprise health department inspections at all 12 locations simultaneously. Violations that had been overlooked for years were suddenly being written up with military precision, and the local food critics, who had always given them favorable reviews, were mysteriously unavailable for comment. Sarah Williams discovered that her trust fund had been frozen due to what her family's attorney described as irregularities in the offshore accounts that required immediate federal scrutiny. As the morning progressed, each of them received the same message. The waitress from Romano's Diner would like to see you. Tonight, 8 o'clock. Come alone. By evening, they had all gathered in the diner's parking lot, their usual arrogance replaced by confusion and fear. The events of the day had been too coordinated, too precise to be coincidental. Somehow, impossibly, it all traced back to the shy waitress they had been tormenting. "This is insane," Brad said, pacing back and forth. "She's just a waitress. There's no way she could do all this." "Then explain it," Jessica snapped. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing the scared young woman underneath. "Explain how everything went wrong for all of us on the same day." Derek was staring at the diner's windows, where warm light spilled out into the darkness. "Maybe we should just leave. Get in our cars and drive away." "We can't," Sarah said quietly. "My lawyer made some calls. Whatever's happening to us, running will only make it worse." They entered the diner together, huddled like prey animals sensing a predator nearby. The familiar restaurant felt different somehow, charged with intention that made their skin crawl. Only a few tables were occupied, and the other customers seemed to be avoiding eye contact with everyone. Maria emerged from the kitchen, and they immediately noticed the changes. Gone was the slouched posture and nervous energy. She moved with fluid confidence, her back straight and her eyes alert. She wore the same uniform, but it fit differently now, as if she had grown several inches taller overnight. "Good evening," she said, approaching their usual table. "I've been expecting you." They sat down without their usual bravado, each of them studying her face for answers they weren't sure they wanted to find. "Who are you?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria smiled, and this time there was nothing submissive about it. "I'm exactly who I've always been. You just weren't paying attention." She pulled out a chair and sat down across from them, a reversal of their usual dynamic that made them all uncomfortable. "Let me tell you a story," Maria began, her voice carrying authority that commanded attention. 5 years ago, my husband needed someone to go undercover in this neighborhood, someone who could blend in, watch, and report back without attracting attention. The perfect cover would be a job that made you invisible, where people looked right through you. The group exchanged glances, beginning to understand but not wanting to believe it. "A waitress," Maria continued, "especially a shy, clumsy one, is practically invisible to people like you. You see the uniform, not the person wearing it. You make assumptions based on your own prejudices, and you never look deeper." Brad's voice cracked when he spoke. "What kind of business does your husband do?" Maria's smile turned cold. "The kind that requires patience, planning, and the ability to make problems disappear." She reached into her apron and pulled out 4 photographs, sliding them across the table. Each image showed one of them at their lowest point that day. Jessica crying in her father's office, Brad watching his father being led away in handcuffs, Derek standing in his shuttered restaurant, Sarah sitting alone in her empty apartment. "You wanted to know what a waitress could do," Maria said. "But you were asking the wrong question. You should have asked what happens when you threaten the wife of Vincent Rossetti." The name hit them like a physical blow. Even sheltered college students had heard whispers about the Rossetti family, rumors that circulated in certain circles about people who controlled things from the shadows. "The Rossetti family doesn't exist," Derek said, his voice shaking. "That's just urban legends and movie nonsense." Maria laughed, a sound that contained no warmth. Tell that to the Yamamoto Corporation. They were very interested to learn about your father's business practices, Jessica. Amazing how cooperative people become when they understand the alternatives. She turned to Brad. Your father's political enemies have been trying to find dirt on him for years. Funny how all that evidence just fell into the right hands yesterday. Derek was next. Health departments can be very thorough when they receive anonymous tips about food safety violations, especially when those tips come with photographic evidence. Finally, she looked at Sarah. Offshore accounts are tricky things. One call to the right people at the IRS, and suddenly everyone wants to take a very close look at where that money came from. The table fell silent, except for Sarah's quiet sobbing. The magnitude of their situation was beginning to sink in. "What do you want?" Jessica asked, her voice hollow. "What I want," Maria said, leaning back in her chair, "is for you to understand something important. Actions have consequences. For 3 years, I've watched you come in here and treat the staff like garbage. You tip poorly. You make messes on purpose. You say cruel things because you think service workers are beneath you." She paused, letting that sink in. "Last week, you decided I would be your personal entertainment. You spent hours trying to break down someone you thought was helpless. You took pleasure in cruelty because you believed there would be no consequences." Brad tried to speak, but Maria held up a hand to silence him. "I could have revealed who I was at any time," she continued. "One phone call, and you would have disappeared entirely. But that wouldn't have taught you anything. You needed to learn that everyone you encounter is a complete person with their own story, their own connections, their own power." She stood up, towering over them now in a way that had nothing to do with height. "So here's what's going to happen. Each of you is going to make some changes in your life. Jessica, your father's business can recover, but only if he starts paying his workers fairly and treating them with respect. Brad, your father's legal troubles can be reduced to minor fines and community service, but he's going to spend that community service working in soup kitchens and homeless shelters." Derek was next. "Your restaurants can reopen, but you're going to implement proper worker protections and profit sharing for your employees. And Sarah, your trust fund can be unfrozen, but you're going to use a significant portion of it to fund scholarships for students who actually need the money." She looked at each of them in turn. "More importantly, all of you are going to spend the next year volunteering in service positions. You're going to work in restaurants, clean office buildings, and do the jobs you've been looking down on. You're going to learn what it feels like to have people treat you the way you've been treating others." Jessica found her voice. "And if we refuse?" Maria's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Then you'll discover that everything that happened today was just a gentle warning. My husband has been very patient with your disrespect toward his wife. But that patience has limits." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. Derek, desperate to find some way out, played his last card. "You can't do this. It's illegal. We'll go to the police." Maria laughed again, genuinely amused this time. "You're going to explain to the police that a waitress orchestrated the downfall of your families because you were mean to her? Do you think they'll believe you? And even if they did, what law exactly do you think I've broken?" She was right, and they knew it. Everything that had happened could be explained as coincidence, bad luck, or the natural consequences of their family's questionable business practices. There was no evidence linking Maria to any of it, nothing that would hold up in court. "There is another option," Maria said, her voice softening slightly. "You can choose to see this as an opportunity, a chance to become better people, to understand how the world really works, to develop some empathy for others." She sat back down, her posture relaxing. "I'm not a monster. I'm a businesswoman who values respect and fairness. Show me that you can learn from this experience, that you can become people worth knowing, and your family's troubles will resolve themselves." Continue to be the entitled, cruel people you've been, and things will get much worse. For the next hour, Maria laid out the specific terms of their rehabilitation. They would each spend 8 hours a week working service jobs, document their experiences, and meet with her monthly to discuss what they had learned. Their families' various crises would be resolved gradually, contingent on their cooperation and genuine change. As the evening wound down, the 4 students sat in stunned silence, their worldview fundamentally altered. The shy waitress, who had seemed so powerless, was actually connected to a network that could destroy them without breaking a sweat. "I have one last thing to say," Maria said as she prepared to leave them. "For the past 3 years, I've been playing a role, pretending to be someone I'm not. But you 4, you haven't been pretending at all. You've shown me exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences." She stood up and smoothed her uniform. "The question now is whether you want to remain those people or if you're capable of becoming something better. That choice is entirely up to you." As Maria walked away, the group sat in the diner's fluorescent lighting, each of them processing what had just happened. Their entire understanding of power, privilege, and consequence had been turned upside down in a single evening. Over the following months, they would discover that Maria had been completely serious about her requirements. They worked in kitchens, cleaned offices, and served customers who sometimes treated them the way they had once treated others. It was a humbling experience that fundamentally changed how they saw the world. Jessica learned to appreciate the skill and patience required to provide good service. Brad discovered that his political instincts were better suited to advocating for workers' rights than for personal advancement. Derek revolutionized his family's restaurant chain, turning it into a model for employee treatment. Sarah became one of the city's most generous philanthropists. And Maria? She continued working at Romano's Diner for another 6 months, finishing her original assignment. But now she worked with confidence and dignity, treated with respect by customers who sensed something different about her even if they couldn't identify what it was. When her undercover work finally ended, she left the diner without fanfare, returning to her real life as the respected wife of a powerful man. But she took with her a renewed appreciation for the people who worked in the shadows, providing services that kept society functioning. The 4 students never forgot the lesson they had learned from the shy waitress who turned out to be anything but powerless. They had discovered that in a world where everyone is connected, where everyone has a story, treating others with cruelty isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Most importantly, they learned that real power doesn't come from putting others down. It comes from lifting them up, from treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their job or social status. And sometimes, it comes from understanding that the person serving your coffee might be much more than they appear to be.